Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. In today's episode, I sat down with Ella Morton. Ella is the co-author of the book Atlas Obscura, an explorer's guide to the world's hidden wonders. And hidden they are, as you'll hear in our conversation. Ella and her team have uncovered some truly unusual sights around the world, things you couldn't even dream up in your wildest imagination. But nevertheless, they're documented in this book, and I think there's about 700 entries in all. Ella and I met when we were both speaking at the Denver Travel and Adventure Show, and I feel really fortunate that our paths crossed because, frankly, I hadn't heard of this book. But I came to find it endlessly fascinating and Ella to be such a delight. Ella grew up in Australia, but she now calls New York City her home. And the truly interesting thing that came out of our conversation was the arc in her life, her storyline, how there were things that she found interesting in her childhood, and then those things manifested into several careers that she's had. And it actually led her to this point, being the co-author of this book. I love to hear when people end up pursuing or creating a lifestyle that seemingly manifested from something they simply loved early on in life. Sometimes this happens on purpose and sometimes by accident. But really, it doesn't matter how. I just find it really inspiring. And that's what I feel like Ella is doing now. I think she's living out her childhood dream. My conversation with Ella will start in just a moment. But before that, I wanted to invite you to check out our trips on the Wander Tours site, where we feature women-only tours to a number of destinations, including India, Southeast Asia, Papua New Guinea. Those are co-ed trips, and Ireland. At this time, we've also got space on our inaugural Santa Fe Wellness Retreat, and that is a trip I am totally excited about. We've also got culinary tours to destinations in the U.S., so please check those out on wandertours.com. I also want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Morton Gear. Morton Gear is a woman-owned company known for their design-your-own camera bags, shoulder purses, and laptop bags. Their sustainable model emphasizes creating products that source supplies from the furniture industry. And what that does, and it's really kind of the best part about all this, is that it keeps remnants out of the landfills. Crafted by professional photographer and company owner Robin Morton, their bags are designed by you and handcrafted in the U.S. Now, I have several bags from Morton, and I truly love them all, and I always get complimented on them. They're beautifully made, and they're very sturdy as well. While that should be enough reason for you to have your own Morton bag, there's another reason you can feel good about supporting the company. Robin has a program where she supports other women by buying them Viking sewing machines in order to get them started in the business. She helps them get set up. She helps them with their company's branding, creating logos and business cards, and then she sends business their way. Now, what they do is they pay her back for the machine on a payment plan. And not only do they work with Robin, she's their first client, but they have other clients as well. Robin has so far changed the lives of 4 women who were previously out of the workforce. And these ladies feel like they are part of something great, and really they are. They've now started their own contract sewing business, and as I said, Robin is their first customer. You can find Morton Gear at mortongear.com, and that's Porteen on Facebook and on Instagram, also at Morton Gear. And on those social media outlets, you'll not only see lovely bags, but you'll also see really beautiful photos because Robin is also an excellent photographer. With that, let's get started with today's conversation. So I'm here today with Ella Morton. Welcome, Ella.
Thank you.
Ella is a lovely New Zealand-born, Aussie-raised, Australia-raised, Brooklyn-based writer. So she's a bit of a fusion herself. And what she does is she focuses on history and culture. Ella is the co-author of a New York Times bestselling book, The Atlas Obscura. And today we're going to hear a little bit about her history, how she came to the U.S., which I think is pretty fascinating, and I want to know more about that. And we're going to talk about some really crazy stuff that we can find in her new book. And as always on this Be Bold podcast, we'll find out what makes her tick and kind of what makes her bold. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And it just so happens that we're both in Denver today for the travel show, which is just incredible. So thanks for your time. And you're going to be speaking. I'm speaking as well. So good luck with that. So give me a little bit of history first. Well, actually, let's first start with the book and tell us a little bit about when it came out and what we can expect from it as well.
So Atlas Obscura is a guide to the world's hidden wonders. The book came out in September 2016, and it all began as a website, atlasobscura.com, which was founded in 2009 by my co-authors, Josh Four and Dylan Thuris. And both of them have an interest in finding things that are maybe a little bit strange, a little bit puzzling. Things like a museum of Victorian hair art run by one person in Independence, Missouri, or a space machine built out of junk by the side of the road by a guy who has a whole alter ego, and a story about climbing into the pod and blasting into space. So they found each other, and it was a meeting of minds, and they started this website to collect a bunch of these places that they had come across. And after they had put in all the places that they knew about and they had discovered for themselves, they started opening the website to submissions and asked people, show us what you've got. Like, what's in your hometown that's a little bit strange? Or, is there a guy building a castle in his backyard that we should know about? Is there a flaming hole in the desert that you've come across? What have you got? And that was in 2009, and now the website has over 10,000 places listed.
10,000?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So what did the bulk of that kind of grow out of this like request for submissions from people?
Yeah. So when these places started piling up, the idea of creating a book as a sort of greatest hits version of the website happened. And then that's when I came on board to work as a writer for the book, and I ended up working at Atlas Obscura, the website where I still work now. So that's how it all came together.
10,000 submissions. And so were you part of the editing process, or have you been part of the editing process for what goes on the website? So is that part of your role?
Not so much. No, not anymore. We have a whole team. Our website is split into a few different sections, and one of them is the places database. And we have a whole places team that is charged with looking at what comes in every day and determining, like, should this be on our website? Is it Atlas Obscura-ish enough? Does it make the cut? So we have a whole team doing that. And I would like to be part of that process sometimes, because I just want to see what comes in every day.
So you get it after it's been kind of culled from that initial...
That's when we get to see it. Okay. But so I'm senior editor at the site now, which is, I focus mostly on commissioning freelance stories for our editorial side, and that is not always place-based, but our criteria are that it should be a story about something that has an element of the hidden, an element of the surprising, and an element of wonder. So it's slightly nebulous criteria, right. But it's a know it when you see it type thing.
Around the office, do you walk around or have the folks walk around and go, oh my gosh, you have to see this, but there's no way we can publish it?
That doesn't actually happen very
often. Oh, it doesn't?
Often.
If it's like that, then you say, oh my gosh, we have to publish this.
That would go really? Straight to the top of the queue.
Tell me what the most obscure thing is in your mind that maybe comes up at a dinner party conversation where you say, oh yeah, check this out.
There are so many good things. One I really like talking about is in the north of Japan, from the 17th to the 19th century, there was this small offshoot of Buddhism, Shigendo, where the monks mummified themselves. And it was this whole process of basically starving themselves, eating bark, drinking sap, and modifying their bodies so that they would start to be preserved while they were still alive. And then they would...
Oh my God, if you could see my face.
There's
right?
a look of horror on your face.
Gosh.
Because when you say like self-mummified, it's just hard to imagine how that happens. Because, you can mummify someone else, but how do you mummify yourself while you're alive?
So they do that until they die?
Yeah.
Is it a form of killing themselves then?
I think it's sort of tied up in like self-sacrifice, like ritualistic stuff. But a few hundred monks apparently tried this over these centuries before it was outlawed. Emperor Meiji was like, guys, can we just have some limits here? But about 24 actually succeeded. And there are a few on display still in the north of Japan. Their bodies have been put on display to be venerated. And it's just these guys sitting in a lotus position, desiccated. It's like in Europe they do with the saints.
Yeah.
They'll put them on display, their mummified bodies. So it's quite similar to that. But facts like that, it's just like your head explodes.
So tell me about the tobacco smoke enemas.
Oh, okay. This is a subject I wrote about a while ago for the site. And it was a method of trying to prevent drowning. And it was actually used along the Thames in London. They would have these like break glass in case of emergency boxes where there would be a kit to give someone an enema, but it's a tobacco smoke enema. And they believed that this had the power to revive someone who had fallen into the Thames and lost consciousness and seemed to have drowned. Which, it's literally blowing smoke.
Right up your butt.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Or your bum, as you might say. But
indeed.
I actually heard a story recently about blowing smoke up your bum, but it was in a different context. It had to do with prostitutes and services.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so I thought that's what you were going to tell me
Not
about
quite.
that. So
this
I
is
find
like
that really interesting.
This is the historical CPR version.
Okay.
Didn't quite work.
Well, okay. Then I was going to say I'll have to remember that next time I'm out at a lake somewhere, but no, I won't.
I probably wouldn't recommend it. I think any recoveries that happened were purely coincidental.
So that's what you're working on today. And does this involve, other than going kind of out on the book tour, are you out traveling, or are you you're home-based, you have an interest in culture and travel and history, but it requires you to be at a desk job, it sounds
I know.
like.
This is sort of the paradox of the whole thing. I feel like I disappoint people when... they've read the book and they're like, what's it like in all these 700 places? And I have to say, well, I haven't been to all of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do. I spend a lot of time sitting at a desk in Brooklyn, New York. I do, because I don't write anymore for the site, I'm not out and about so much. But when I did, I would do things like go to the New York Public Library main branch and look at archives or get a librarian to show me something. There was this fascinating story that I came across about a type of handwriting that was developed by librarians for the sake of card catalogs that was really neat. So this wonderful librarian at the New York Public Library showed me all these examples of this particular style of handwriting. So stories like that, I'd travel across the river to Manhattan. But yeah, it is a bit...
Well, is that something that's in the book, or is this just like an interesting fact that you came across in the process of researching? You said,
so this is more, it gets confusing. So this is more on the editorial side of the website.
Yeah.
So we have our 10,000 places in the database. That's like if you are looking to travel and you're looking for weird stuff to see in, say, Denver, where we are right now, that's where you would look. And then we have every day, it's sort of like an online magazine of stories that are about like culture, history, language, that we think that people who would visit the site for the places would be interested in.
And how often is that getting updated?
We post like 8 stories a day.
Okay, so you have a full-on team researching and taking in those odd requests that are coming in. Not a lot of travel.
No,
a lot
sadly.
of time behind the keyboard, it sounds like.
I do want to get out more. I'm going to Havana next month as part of an Atlas Obscura trip.
Fantastic.
Because we do these trips now once a month all around the world. So that's going to be good.
That is great.
And
on these trips, like when you go to Havana, you'll be seeking out and kind of showing your tour people these weird things, or is it kind of
Yes.
more of a standard tour?
So we're sort of applying the Atlas Obscura lens to particular locations. So the difference with our trips would be that you might not see what you would see on a like must see bucket list type thing, but you would see the stranger stuff.
Really off the beaten path.
Yeah, like the abandoned nuclear power plant, those sorts of things.
Not in Havana.
No.
Okay, good. So you do have a little travel coming up.
Yes.
Good. So that can kind of scratch the itch of your travel bug.
Yeah, I know. I've been watching people go on various trips and getting jealous.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you actually started out as a young traveler, at least with the Wanderlust.
Yes.
So you were born in New Zealand.
Yeah.
How long did you live there?
I was born in Wellington and lived there until I was 3.
And then
So not very long.
Right, and then moved to Australia. Whereabouts in Australia?
Sydney.
Oh, okay, great. And then you grew up in Sydney?
Yeah. Moved to New York at the age of 25.
Well, wait, there was something else in there. Didn't you go to high school?
Yes. Okay. This is a strange story. When I think I was 14, I just got it in my head because my mother is American. She grew up in Michigan. And so when I was born, I was registered as an American citizen. I have an American passport.
But you were born in New Zealand.
New Zealand.
Okay.
Yeah. There's all these different countries in the mix. So I'd always had this sense of like, well, I'm half American, sort of, but I don't really know what that means because I'd been on trips, but I hadn't spent a lot of time here. So when I was 14, I just decided that I wanted to go to school in America to experience it. And I told my mother this, and she was like, okay, really? I guess. And she let me go by myself if I stayed with family. And so I had an aunt in Dallas, or just outside Dallas. And so we arranged it so that I would stay in Dallas for 3 months. And then my mother and sister would come over and we would go traveling like down to Georgia and Florida. And I had this idea in my head of what it would be like to turn up in a suburb of Dallas as this, what I thought would be like an exotic Australian, like people would ask me all these questions and I would be so popular and different. And I turned up and people were like, why did you come here? Like what made you choose?
Who are you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And people thought I was really stuck up. I think maybe because of my accent, and because I was kind of a bit discombobulated by the whole thing and maybe a little bit shy. And so they, I think, interpreted that as me being snobby or like thinking I was above them or something. So it was an interesting experience. I mean, I'm glad that I had it for sure.
Was it just 3 months? You were able to come for just 3 months?
Yeah. I don't even know how that happened.
Yeah.
And they made me get like all these vaccinations and register in various ways. And I think I had to redo part of 9th grade because the year works differently in Australia. Yeah. It goes from February to December. So I came over and I'd already finished a grade and then I had to go back to it. But it was one of those things like you have this idea and you think you know what it will be like and it's just not like what you thought at all.
Were you glad that you still did it though?
I was, for sure, because it gave me a different perspective. It was so different. The experience was so different than the school experience I'd been having in Sydney.
Do you think the actual schooling, or do you think that the big difference was just that the kids were so different?
I think the way that the school system is set up is completely different. I mean, the school that I went to in Sydney is like pretty straight-laced and there's like a uniform and it was all girls. And then this one in Texas is like a free-for-all, crazy things are happening. There's like the cliques in the cafeteria. We didn't even have a cafeteria in Sydney.
What year was that?
1997, 8. Yeah. So it was fascinating. I remember they took a school photo and it was like 900 kids in 9th grade.
Wow.
So we all posed for this photo and they said, if you make a gang sign, you will be blacked out of the photo. And then we got this photo back. It was this huge like rollout laminated thing. And there were all these shadow people who had been blacked out for making gang signs. It was like, whoa, you just erased people. Wow.
Welcome to America.
Yeah. It's interesting.
How many kids were in your grade when you were in Australia?
I think it was 150. Yeah.
That was a huge difference.
Yeah.
So that had to be like culture shock and then overwhelming and then just not being embraced like you thought you would be. Yeah, that had to be hard. But still, you were brave enough to
I was brave / foolish enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it takes foolishness to make decisions and take big leaps like that. So 3 months, and then did you travel then with your family?
Yes,
after that?
I had relatives in Atlanta, and my mother and sister came over and rented a car and drove around and went to Savannah and down to, I think, Tampa. So that was fun.
Did you have that kind of wanderlust at that point? Like, did you know you were that you found the world curious and that you wanted to see a lot of things, or do you remember kind of how that trip was for you then?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was like a little bit selfish because I wanted to seem like a worldly person to my friends in Sydney. Like I wanted to come back and be like, yeah, I went to school in America. What have you done?
Yeah, right. For 3 months.
Yeah, but I don't know. I've seen this as a common kind of thread in what I'm interested in, and a lot of it is to do with seeing how other people view the world and like looking at it through other people's perspectives and being interested in that and being open to the idea of how people see the world.
So you went back to Australia then and finished your high school.
Yeah.
And then what?
Then things got a bit weird. I went to this school that was very academically focused, and I was very into theater and acting and that sort of thing. But I had this notion that I shouldn't go to acting school because it would be like a waste of my brain, which is silly. But that was sort of the message, is like, okay, well, you should enroll in law or medicine or commerce. So in Australia, you can do law at the undergraduate level if you combine it with another degree. So I enrolled in a combined arts and law degree, which is so dumb because I would have made the worst lawyer. I would have been like an Ally McBeal caliber lawyer.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a dated reference, but
I got it.
Yeah. So I did the law part for a year, and I just never really got into it. And I remember walking straight from my torts exam to the law office and asking for a discontinuation form and just being like, I'm over this.
Is that your big test that you take?
It was like an end of year exam on a particular subject.
Okay, the tort, yeah.
And I just it was like the second we put our pens down, I started walking to the office to get that form.
You just knew it wasn't for you.
Yeah.
Then did you pursue the arts then?
So I kept going with the arts part. I was majoring in English and was doing a bit of like sociology, Japanese, grab bag of things. And then I was also getting really involved in campus theatre. So writing short plays and directing and acting. And I don't know, this is like a strange part of my life because I ended up dropping out of college. I never finished my undergrad, and it's very unusual everyone around me that I work with has at least an undergrad qualification. Like I've had people apply to be interns with us who have master's degrees, and it's a bit of a strange, I have some complex feelings about that, about like why I didn't finish and what that says about me. But I've kind of had to let that go. But I was a bit lost for a while because I just didn't really know.
Were you lost because you felt like you should have finished? Like, are you tying that together, or you were lost because you just didn't know what you wanted to do?
I had things that I was definitely interested in, like writing, acting, but I was too timid to become an actual actor because the constant rejection I wasn't ready for or like psychologically able to withstand, I didn't think.
Well, it's also one of those things where like you kind of started your education description out by saying that you shouldn't do arts, and it's because we get told that there are things that you shouldn't do. You should use your brain. You should be a lawyer. You should be a doctor. You should do something that requires more brain power. That's just a perception. It's not, not necessarily truth in that. So I can see how you you're being hard on yourself for that, because we all have our own paths. And I mean, right now, I think there's a lot of people, especially in the US, questioning whether college is valid, because it is so stinking expensive. It's like, it's a huge investment and you don't know what's going to be on the other end of it.
Right.
So I think in a lot of ways it's become less of a big deal.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch that switch.
Yeah.
I think I just like the idea of not finishing something that I was clearly capable of doing, but just like I stopped going to classes and I didn't inform anyone. I have on my transcript, it's like straight zeros for a semester. So that was like my rebellion phase.
Right. And that was still in Australia.
Yeah. And it was right after I finished high school, my mother and sister moved to New York. And that was right before 9/11. And it was just a weird time. So it sort of I felt a bit isolated down in Sydney. I didn't go to New York because the cost of college is so much higher in the US. It's subsidized in Australia. So I stayed behind to go to college. But yeah, it was a weird time. I'm glad to be on the other side of it now.
Right. And then you finally made your way to New York yourself.
Yes. I worked a little bit at a company called CNET in Sydney, trying and failing to be a good technology journalist.
Right.
But so that gave me...
So just a quick question. Is CNET actually based in Australia? Or is that just, that's a part of it?
It's an offshoot. It's based in San Francisco.
Okay.
And then, yeah, they sort of let us do whatever we wanted down in Australia because there's a lot of content sharing. It was a good company to work at in your early to mid 20s because everyone was around the same age and had a sort of party.
Right. It was that probably the early 2000s.
Yeah. Yep, it's like .com.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So we didn't get a lot of work done, but it was a good social environment.
Yeah. But a fun place.
Yeah.
So from CNET, then what?
What happened then? I stayed there for a while. I was there for about 4.5 years. Okay. And the whole time after I'd finished high school, I did intend to move to New York at some point. And I just kept putting it off because for various reasons, I was scared. I had a sort of comfortable job where I didn't have to do a lot of work and I was being paid enough to waste some money on whatever. And I didn't have a degree, moving to New York without even an undergrad qualification and trying to get a job in a very competitive industry in, publishing or editorial, whatever, was a daunting prospect. And I didn't quite know if I wanted to try to do the acting thing still or to host something or to write. And so I was just being timid about it. Yeah. And
what got you over the hump?
Well, I can't remember like the exact moment that I decided, but the fact that my family had been over there for so long was definitely a huge factor because it just felt like I need to be with these people. Like I'm losing my hub. And also then the global financial crisis happened, which I could have used as an excuse to not go because it seemed like, should I go to New York without a job during a recession, without a degree? That seems ridiculous. But I did have the fact that my mother and sister lived there already, so it wasn't like, I could stay there. So I was very lucky in that regard. And also the fact that I'm an American citizen, definitely highly beneficial.
So what year did you end up going to New York?
It was the beginning of 2009.
Oh, okay. So long after 9/11.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And then just as we realized we were in a financial crisis.
Yes.
Like a year,
I turned up.
After. Yeah,
like,
that's
hi,
great.
Give me a job, please.
I know, but you know what? I actually started my business in 2007, 2008. But at the time, you don't really know what's going on. You know, you just have to keep living your life, right?
True.
So you make your decisions when they're the right decisions for you at that time. And you kind of have to ignore the outer experiences or, that what's going on the outside, I think.
Because I think you can use it as an excuse and blame your inaction on something bigger when it's actually you being timid.
And I think it happens all the time. I think people look at those outside events and they internalize them and they forget how much control we forget. I'll use myself too, because I do it too, not not shy to say that. But yeah, so we just will use excuses because something's happening on the outside. And really, then we finally get motivated to make a move,
True.
to
And
do
then you
something.
go, why didn't I do this 5 years ago?
Right. Is that what you said? Did you think like, I should have done this a little bit sooner?
I mean, I am glad that New York is a difficult city to establish yourself in. So I think if I had gone there in my early 20s, I may have been a bit more overwhelmed and freaked out. So I'm glad that I waited till I was 25 in that regard. It still was weird. I mean, I remember in the first few days of being there, I was walking through the subway station in Times Square just with so many people streaming past me, and I just felt like a sense of panic of like, what have I done? I gave up this very comfortable existence in a beautiful beachside place where life was pretty chilled out, and now there's this sort of frenetic, frightening atmosphere that I'm living in where, New York, it's like you sacrifice a lot. It's really expensive. Like you live in a tiny, tiny shoebox, drag your laundry through the snow to the laundromat at the end of the block. But I think it's almost like a Stockholm syndrome thing where it makes you love it more.
Oh,
like
really?
You love your captor.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. So is that when you had that moment in Times Square with everybody coming at you, how did you get over that and say, nope, I'm just going to hunker down and stay here? Like, why didn't you just turn around and leave?
I mean, having my family there was definitely it was very grounding. I think if I moved over by myself, it would have been so much more intimidating.
So it was really the family that kept you.
Yeah. And I was so determined. I mean, I talked about it with my mother, and we said like, if this sucks, if I hate it, I can always move back to Australia in a year or however long I give myself. And so that was almost like having that out made it a bit more comfortable to try things out.
Yeah, a little less pressure.
Yeah, for sure.
So then, so you're in New York.
Yeah.
And what was your first job there?
So my first job, I applied for it along with about 400 other people in a very public application process. It was for a show, a web show called Rocket Boom that used to be big. It was one of the first daily video series before YouTube became big, and they were looking for a new host. And so I sent my demo reel, because I used to host video reviews as part of my CNET job. So try to make like talking about an MP3 player's features interesting. So yeah, they were looking for a new host, and there was this application process where you had to submit your reel, and you could see who else was submitting. And,
interesting.
And every day the number would get higher and higher, and I would see it being posted everywhere, and I was like, don't tell people about this because I want this job. And then enough time passed where I just thought, okay, well, this is obviously not happening. And then I got contacted saying, we're considering you for this. And I ended up getting a job not as the main host, but as a New York City correspondent. So they sort of created this new sub show, I guess, or like spin-off. And it's amazing how similar it is to Atlas Obscura, actually. But I would go around New York and talk to interesting people who were doing creative things. Like there was this one guy who was making bikes from scratch in these weird designs. Or I would...
That does tie in so much to the
I know.
book. That's crazy.
I interviewed the curator of the Morbid Anatomy Library, which is this library in Brooklyn that focused on mortality and the cultural treatment of it in various contexts. So that was really fun. And that went on for a while. I think I was there for about a year and a half or 2 years. But that was a freelance gig, and I got paid per episode. So I had a lot of spare time to be doing other things.
Right.
So I was picking up little writing gigs and meeting interesting people around New York, and I was doing improv classes and just kind of testing out a bunch of different things. But it was a good time.
And then what was it that led you directly to the book then?
So It's another one of those winding roads. I had gotten involved with this company called Record Setter, which is a online. It's sort of like they hate it when it gets compared to the Guinness Book of Records, but it's
Well, that was the first thing that I thought of. But I'm laughing to myself because I'm like, whether on purpose or you've tumbled into these things, there is this definite thread through your life of
For
these
sure.
really interesting things. Like I don't know, I know one person in Seattle who does these like really interesting, off the beaten path things, very similar to this. But I don't know of anybody who's had like this career, like just this thread that goes through with all these really really bizarre things, totally bizarre.
It's funny how it happened, and it makes me think often about. I remember when I was maybe 8 or 9, my dad brought home. I think it was Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego. It was this video game,
yeah.
and it came with a desktop almanac. And I remember going to bed with that almanac and just flipping open to a random page and reading about just weird things around the world and what different people were doing and history and culture. And I feel like that 8-year-old clutching the almanac again. Like, this is what I'm doing with Atlas Obscura. It's what I did with Rocket Boom. So it is what I've always wanted to do, really.
Did you know you wanted to do it, or did it
I
just?
don't know.
It's just the coincidence is too.
Yeah.
It's just too amazing, but you didn't set out and go, I'm going to do the strangest things on the planet.
I mean, the common thread is almost curiosity and storytelling. I think all of us who work at Atlas Obscura are just very curious people. We just want to know how things work and what the story behind something is and how it came to be. So that's definitely been a common thread, just that curiosity.
And hence you're wearing a Dana Scully
oh my gosh, I almost missed
great.
my flight this morning. I just picked this up. Yeah, I have a t-shirt that has Dana Scully, Our Lady of Skepticism
I
on
know,
it.
that's great, of course.
I love the X-Files.
Yeah, that is great. I'm not sure if this is in your bio or something that you had mentioned to me, that you're actually the holder of 3 passports.
Yes.
Which is crazy. And I actually thought, obviously mistakenly, that if you were born outside of the U.S., I didn't know you could automatically get a U.S. passport.
Yes. And I actually had a slightly contentious conversation with someone about this, about like whether I'm a real American and what that might mean. Because I'd always just sort of taken it for granted that my mother registered me when I was born and I'm an American citizen and it just happened. And I definitely, it's not until I moved here and talked to other Australians and people from the UK who have had such a hard time getting visas and figuring out how to live in the US. And I just waltzed straight in. So yeah, I guess you can, if you are born to an American citizen outside of the US, you can get registered as an American citizen.
And then you can do the dual citizenship because you have a parent of another.
Yes. And there are all these tricky rules depending on the country about whether you can hold multiple citizenships or you have to give one up. But
we won't tell anyone.
I think they don't really care down in Australia or New Zealand.
Yeah, no,
It's
but
like,
well, here they do.
Yeah.
So how do you have a New Zealand and an Australian passport?
New Zealand because I was born there, and Australian, I think because I moved there so young and lived there for so long, it just happened. I remember when I think it was 1988. I would have been 5. I remember going with my dad to the office and like reciting the pledge or singing the anthem or something. Yeah. So I don't know how that happened. I should look that up.
Yeah, I'm
but
curious.
Somehow I am an Australian citizen.
Well, I always thought that you were either a Kiwi or an Aussie.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that people could have both.
And it's weird when people ask me where I'm from or like questions about identity.
I was just going to ask you that. Like, how do you answer that?
Well, I say Australian because I have kind of an Australian accent and I've lived there, from 3 to 25. My sister, funnily enough, who moved to New York at the age of 15 and speaks with a funny half American-ish accent, says she's from New Zealand and she left there when she was 1.
But because she was born there, she just says that.
So we have different criteria. I mean, I think culturally I am Australian, I guess. So I just say Australian for the sake of simplicity, but it's complicated.
I could see that. So also in something that I had read, you did talk about some of your past travels.
Yes.
Including a trip from London to Croatia.
Oh,
is that
yeah.
right? Yeah. So tell me about some of your travels. And I do know, and maybe this is something that kind of stands out for you in terms of trying to understand American culture, is that that Australians travel a lot.
Oh my gosh.
Like it's just part of the culture.
Wherever you go in the world, you'll find an Australian
Yeah.
who's probably drunk and wearing
But
flip-flops.
but having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So what were your travels like, and did that come from your family? Were your
Both my parents are pretty big travelers. And when I was a kid, my dad would send us photos from like Cambodia and Egypt, various places around the world. But I think the desire to travel is very much a part of Australian identity, just because you are so far away that there's this desire to get out there. And once you take that 13-hour flight, it's like, well, I'm here now. I may as well see every other country around here. So there is this sort of cultural phenomenon of when you finish high school, you do the big trip, like you backpack through
the gap
Europe.
year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this great trip that I went on that started in London, that I went on with a friend of mine, where we took a train from London and ended up on various trains down through like the Czech Republic and where else did we go? I think we were in Brussels briefly, but we ended up down on the Adriatic in Croatia. And before that point, I'd been a really big planner. Like when I flew to Texas, I went via Japan for some strange reason, but I would like look up maps of the Tokyo airport 2 months before I was going there, just for some weird like desire to plan and know what to expect and have some sort of comfort in the familiarity of that.
Were you stressed about it?
I think I was more excited.
Oh, okay.
And there was something about like looking at the maps of the place that made it real and helped add to the anticipation. But so that sort of carried over into my travel philosophy. Like I always wanted to make a list and figure out where we were going to be each day and what were the, top 5 places to see that would definitely be great, so we wouldn't waste any time. And this trip was completely different. I went with someone who...
The London, Croatia
trip.
Yeah.
A friend of mine who lived in London at the time, he is the kind of guy to front up to a train station and be like, where are the trains going today? Let's get on one. I wonder what time it leaves. Whereas I would have been like, it leaves at 8:45. It is making the following 12 stops. And initially that really stressed me out that he had such a casual approach to everything, because I was a bit of a worrier. But it really showed me the benefit of traveling in that way, because we would do things like, we arrived in, was it Brussels? It's wherever they carpet a square in flower petals for like 2 days. And we just happened to arrive during those 2 days. And so we saw this incredible flower carpet.
It's not Geneva, is it?
No, it's definitely in Belgium.
Okay.
But we had no idea that we were going to see that. And, I could have planned for it, but then I would have known to expect it. So just having the surprise factor it just added so much to the experience. And like when we arrived in Dubrovnik in Croatia, the standard process there is that you get off the train and a bunch of old ladies fight over you to try to get you to stay in their spare room.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which ordinarily I'd be like, this is not official. Like, what's happening? But we chose a random old lady and it ended up being great and we had good food.
How long was that trip?
I'm trying to remember. I think it was like 2 weeks. Yeah. I love trains as well. I just adore sitting there and watching the landscape go past.
So ordinarily you're a planner.
Yes.
But that trip was unplanned. Did you kind of learn from that?
Definitely.
And from then on, you just kind of loosened up a little bit, or did that affect your future travels?
Definitely. Because I've been such a planner because I just want to know that everything will go right and it will be good and I know what to expect. There's something that felt comforting about that. But then it's also, there's not a lot of surprise when you approach it like that. So being able to just wander and go with the flow and take a risk on an experience that might end up being not enjoyable, but like might end up being the most incredible thing you've ever experienced.
So what year was that you did the
I'm
London,
trying to
Croatia?
remember. I think it was like 2005.
Internet was just starting to come online and be popular. I mean, it was around,
Yeah.
like,
But I wasn't walking around with a smartphone or anything.
exactly. So now everybody knows everything before they leave.
Yes.
Or they have recommendations from friends
Right.
before they leave.
Everyone's looked up the TripAdvisor reviews and read all the things to look out for.
What do you think about that?
I mean, I can see its benefits and it's good to share information, but I think you can get really caught up in that. And it's almost like you feel like you've already seen it by just reading about it, having that secondhand experience. It's almost like I remember seeing the Mona Lisa and being a little bit underwhelmed just because
You had
like
seen it so much.
yeah, and I'd read all the things about it and what to expect and people saying it's smaller than you think it will be, so be prepared for that. And just like it's almost like it had been explained to death. It was still impressive. But and there were all these people like crowding in front of it, taking selfies, and I don't know, there's something very satisfying about discovering something for yourself. And so
So how do we do that ourselves, and how do we impress upon other people, maybe younger people who didn't have those experiences growing up? Like how do we change that?
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I have a bit of a quandary because, I've just said, like, don't look up what people say, discover it for yourself. And then I have
A book.
this book of
Right.
like 700 places that I'm telling people where to go, basically. But I think, I mean, one of the sort of philosophies we hope to get across with this book is this is like a starter pack. It's more of a way of seeing the world. And, here's a collection of 700 places that, yeah, you can go to, but it's not quite a travel guide or bucket list. It's more about like, here's your first 700. Now, what can you discover?
Well, the interesting thing about that is that you look at that or you read your website and you realize there are other things out there
Yes.
other than Tower Bridge in London or, just fill in the blank, whatever it is, the Sydney Opera House.
Yes.
And you realize there's a lot beyond that.
Absolutely.
But we just don't take the time to discover it. That's the
Yeah.
problem.
Definitely. And it working at Atlas Obscura has definitely not only changed my travel philosophy, but sort of my day-to-day living in the world philosophy. Because there are just so many stories. It's almost like it's put an extra layer on the world.
Because now you know that there's something else going on. Like
Yeah, or like there's this example that I like to give, which is that on Wall Street in New York, there's a wall of a building that has all these pockmarks in it. And it's kind of strange because there's no real reason for that to be there. There's no sign or anything. And the rest of the building is really smooth. And those marks were made during a terrorist attack in 1920 that was from a bomb that had been placed on a horse cart by, they think, a bunch of Italian anarchists who were fresh from the Bolshevik Revolution. But those marks are still there from this strange event, like almost 100 years ago. And people walk past them every day and don't notice them. But if you know the story, it's like enhanced reality.
So how do you find, I guess you go to your website for
Yeah.
one thing, but for the person who's they don't have their smartphone, or they don't have the book, which it looks like a huge Bible. It's a
brick of a book.
It is a brick of a book. It's like the big book of travel. It is awesome. But are there kind of secrets, or have you unlocked the secrets because you have a website? But are there secret ways to kind of figure out like what are the interesting places to go see in a city?
It's hard. I mean, I think one big one is sort of a cliche observation, but talking to locals is really good. And not just relying on the standard like top five recommendations. I mean, obviously, like if you go, this is one of my favorite examples. Is like if you go to Florence, yes, you should see the Uffizi. Like you should line up for however long it takes to get in there and look at the Botticelli and be dazzled by the incredible Renaissance art. But what you should also do is go around the corner to the Science Museum and go and see Galileo's middle finger,
Oh, I missed
which is
that.
held there in a little glass goblet thing. And, you know, most people wouldn't know about that, but it's sort of, it's an experience that you can have alongside the usual stuff that is, you know, sort of the more standard experiences that are definitely worth having. But I think the combination of them is good.
I think that is great. And I think speaking with the locals is a wonderful idea. I think you have to phrase your question the appropriate way though, because
Right.
if you ask the hotel concierge for a restaurant,
Yes.
they're gonna tell you the tourist answer to that. So
Yeah.
you've got to like really kind of dig and say no, 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 what I really want. And I think about this like especially like traveling to developing countries where I want to go and eat where the locals eat.
Right.
And if you ask someone, they'll tell you the restaurant that's nice for the tourists.
Yes.
And they won't tell you where the really good stuff is.
Yeah, it
which
can
is
be
sad.
hard. And of course, like everyone now wants to have that unique experience of like, don't tell me where the tourists don't go. Like, let me have the local experience. But, and so then like those places start to get overrun and then you have to find the other place and it's hard.
It is. But there's still a big world out there. And I think it is really important to unplug and to talk to people
Yeah.
and not rely on stuff. You know, I hardly ever use TripAdvisor. And it's funny. I hear people refer to it a lot. I mean, certainly I know what it is and I've been on TripAdvisor, but it is not my go-to resource. You
Right.
know, it's just not. Maybe it should be. I don't know. But I just find it interesting. I think that there is a generation of people who don't make a decision until they've asked their friends or
Right.
they've looked at a rating. And you know what? Maybe that's not a bad thing because it makes hotels, restaurants up their game because they have to
Yes.
address the issues because everyone's going
Yeah.
there.
And I mean, I understand that mentality because when you have limited time, you want to have an experience that will likely be positive. And so if
True.
you take the time to research, yes, this is definitely a good thing that you will enjoy. Sure, like if you have limited time, you may as well go for the thing that is definitely good. But it does take some surprise and fun out of the whole
Yeah,
thing.
it does. A couple of questions here, just kind of wrapping up. So, looking back, kind of your pre Atlas Obscura days, is there something in your travels that surprised you that you kind of came across other than the train trip that you took, but maybe you were out on your own and you discovered something and you said, "Wow, I didn't know this existed," or "I had no idea I was going to have that kind of experience." Is there something that kind of stands out for you?
There was, I was actually with my sister in Poland, in Krakow, and they have these mounds there, like grassy mounds. And we became obsessed with these mounds for some reason. And so we would go, because there are a few of them around the city. But to get to them, it's a bit weird. Like you have to cross a highway or get off a train at a certain place and then go through woods that look like you probably shouldn't be going through them. But we climbed this particular mound and there was this amazing view of the city. And on the other side of it, it was really strange. It looked like, because around that area, there are the remains of a concentration camp. And we looked over off this cliff into a sort of clearing thing. And it seemed like there were like the remains of machinery that had been used at one of these camps. And we were just really confused by what we were seeing because it looked too sort of new or like not dilapidated enough to have been genuine remains from this place. And so after we left, I did a bit of research, dug into it online, and it turned out that it was the remains of a film that had been shot there that was set in a concentration camp.
Oh, no kidding.
But it was also the grounds of a former concentration camp. So it was like this layer of
that's weird.
fiction on top of reality.
That is strange.
It was very strange.
Well, good for you for going to look it up too.
Yeah, I was endlessly curious always.
So to that end, curiosity and boldness, do you have anything that's coming up? I know you've got your Havana trip happening.
Yes.
Do you have anything else that you would consider bold that you have coming up in the near or far future?
Bold. Let me see. I'm trying to become like a more well-rounded person and learn more skills.
Such as?
So this is embarrassing to admit at my age, but I'm a terrible cook. And
Me too. So
yay!
Yeah.
I actually was trying to cook a few months ago and ended up slicing my finger and fainting.
Okay, I haven't done that.
And it wasn't even a bad cut. It's so embarrassing. It was the tiniest cut, but me and blood don't get along. So I'm trying to be more bold in a day-to-day sense. And that probably sounds super boring to be taking cooking classes.
No,
but,
not at all.
There's this organization in New York called League of Kitchens where they get immigrants who are really good cooks to... you basically go into their kitchen and they teach you how to make a meal and then you sit down and eat it together. And we've started doing a bit of work with them. And that's my next thing that I want to do is cook with the League of Kitchens.
So is this only in New York? Do you know?
So
or do you
far,
think,
yes.
Oh my gosh, please come to Seattle.
I know.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, I'm not a great cook myself, and I go through phases of where I get all my cookbooks out and I try Indian food, or I try one thing or another. I have like the best intentions, and I fall back on soups and salads. I can do those pretty well. So great. So everyday life boldness.
Yeah, I'm trying to become bolder on a daily basis and not have to like go halfway around the world to have an excuse to be bold.
You know what? One thing that I have found in just kind of trying to get the be bold message out there and kind of using the word and kind of thinking of it myself is that everyone has a different definition of it. Maybe not a definition, but they have different thinking about it. And I can use it in my everyday life as well. So I can go down to the barista down at Starbucks and maybe I'm feeling shy. And then I think, you know what, I'm going to be bold today. I'm going to strike up a conversation with this person. So I think it can be something really simple. It doesn't have to be like, I'm going to go climb a mountain or, jump from a plane, I think it can be anything. So I think that's great. So we'll have to share notes on cooking.
Okay.
No slicing fingers off. So,
oh my goodness.
Finally, can we find you on social media? Do you have a social media presence?
On Twitter, I'm Ella Morton. I just deleted my Facebook because I felt like it was reinforcing some of my bad habits and instincts. And I feel so free. But
tell me about the bad habits and instincts.
I think... things were becoming a bit too performative. Like I would post things and then look for the response and be like checking for a response and seeing who would notice that I'd done a certain thing. And then it just made me think like, why am I doing this? Why am I trying to impress people? Why am I hoping that people will like validate me because I posted a photo or
that you got 150 likes?
Yeah, I know. Like you can't quantify that kind of stuff. It's silly. So, yeah, I mean, people use Facebook for different reasons. Like, for me, it was just becoming a bit. I didn't want to have to think that I was living in front of an audience, and that was I created that problem for myself. But it's made me talk to people more because it's made me not rely on the fact that I know things because I've seen them on Facebook, so I don't need to talk to that person. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram where I'll be looking for validation from your likes.
Okay, great. And what's your Instagram?
Ella Morton.
Okay, so it's Twitter stresses me out. Like I can't do Twitter because it's like it gives me heart palpitations just thinking of it. Like that feed going.
Yeah,
through.
it races by really fast. Yeah. It's hard to keep up with.
It does. Well, great. I'll put those in the show notes so we know where to find you and your website for the Atlas Obscura as well. And thanks so much for being here today, too.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it. Yeah.
I'm going to go out and be bolder now.
Excellent. Good. Well, at least go cook.
Yes.
Thanks, Ella.
Thank you.
Isn't she sweet? I love how she's always had this curiosity about the world and how that manifested into several jobs where she's been able to just blossom. I think that's really cool. You can find links to Ella's book and her social media accounts in the show notes on the Wanderlust and Lipstick website, and that's at wanderlustandlipstick.com/podcast. You can find out more about me by visiting Wanderlust and Lipstick, as well as Wander Tours, where you'll see the tours that I lead around the world. I encourage you to also check out the Wander World Foundation. That's the nonprofit I founded to help women and children in developing countries. I'll put links to all those sites in the show notes. Friend me on Facebook, and I'm WanderGal on Instagram. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, and write a review. Please also share this podcast with friends so we can grow our Be Bold community. Doing any of those things or all of those things will help the podcast get more exposure. Thanks in advance for posting on social media to help get the word out, and don't forget to use the hashtag #BeBold. If you know of any high-performing, adventurous, philanthropic women whom you might think would be a good guest, shoot me a note or leave a comment. And finally, the ladies can join us on our Be Bold Facebook group. That's where you'll find our community. It's where we share goals, talk about our setbacks, and where you can find words of encouragement and inspiration from others. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Be Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.